Janice Parker rose in the private room at River North, lifted her glass, and announced that tonight I would finally get to touch real paper in front of everyone. Then she angled one manicured hand toward the small stage, called me up to open the Navy folio for Reed and Emma, and smiled like the evening belonged to her. When I turned over the printed program beside my plate, a carefully folded note slipped loose, and Diane Foster's narrow handwriting told me, "Don't let Janice open page 3. I kept my face still, unfolded the paper beneath the table, and read the next line twice because the words were too specific to belong to ordinary panic. Check the notary block. It read, "Commission expired before the signature date." And just like that, the room, the dinner, and Janice's smile changed shape under my skin. Janice kept talking about family, legacy, and a beautiful beginning, while I rose with the folio in my hands and felt Owen watching me from the end of the table. Up close, the navy leather looked expensive enough to calm anyone who did not read title documents for a living, which was exactly the kind of confidence Janice trusted. I opened to the deed packet, found page 3, and saw the acknowledgement block before anything else. A neat official square carrying a commission already dead at first glance. Behind me, Janice was still smiling for the room, but I closed the folio, walked toward the display table, and knew the party had already split open tonight. My name is Lila Grayson. I was 29, and I had spent 6 years reading title histories the way other people read faces in elevators. I worked as a senior title examiner in Chicago, where one legal description, one expired acknowledgement, or one stray signature could poison ownership for years. Janice Parker never respected that work because it happened behind a screen, inside county records, and beneath the polished authority she liked carefully performing. She had spent years as a closing supervisor, and she carried that old job like a credentialed weapon, always ready to remind everyone she understood transactions. What she meant by real was simple enough. Her version counted. Her experience outranked mine, and anything I knew belonged to clerks, not decision-makers. Since marrying Owen, I had watched her use that tone at birthdays, holidays, and dinners. Soft enough for deniability and sharp enough to leave marks everywhere. Tonight she had chosen an engagement dinner and a room full of witnesses, which told me the folio was never meant as a private gift tonight. It was meant to become public fact by applause. The kind of family announcement nobody interrupts because interruption itself can be painted as bitterness. That was Janice's favorite move, turning timing into pressure, pressure into silence, and silence into agreement, then acting surprised when nobody volunteered to object. I looked down at page 3 again, at the dead commission inside that notary block, and understood why she had wanted my hands there tonight. If everything went smoothly, my presence beside that folio would help her later, because people usually remember scenes first and documents second after champagne. So while Janice kept smiling at Reed and Emma like this was generosity, I stood there holding proof she only respected what she best controlled. I did not need more than a glance to know page 3 was wrong in ways nobody drinking champagne across linen would ever catch. The notary commission had expired before the supposed signature date, which meant the acknowledgement block carried authority it no longer legally possessed. Below that, the property address matched the Lincoln Park brownstone, but the legal description belonged to an older record from before the rear lot consolidation. That kind of mismatch does not drift into a clean transfer packet by accident, especially not when Janice Parker once built her career policing closings. It happens when someone pulls an old form fast, counts on appearances, and assumes nobody in the room knows where the bones are buried. I turned one page further and found the cover memo, and that was where my pulse changed, because my name sat there beside, reviewed by... I had never seen that folio before tonight, never approved its contents, never allowed my title work to stand behind whatever Janice intended. She had not just brought a questionable deed into Reed and Emma's engagement dinner. She had quietly tried to borrow my credibility. That detail clarified the whole architecture for me. Because a forged review line does not exist to impress family. It exists to survive scrutiny later. When I raised my eyes, Emma was already studying my face, and Owen had stopped pretending Janice's little performance was harmless family theater. I asked where Diane was, and Janice cut in too quickly, smiling toward the room that Diane was tired but had given verbal permission. That sentence landed harder than the dead commission, because real property in Illinois does not move by warm sentiment, family intention, or anybody's convenient recollection. I closed the folio halfway, keeping one thumb inside page 3, and told Janice I needed her to repeat that more slowly. She gave me a look meant to shrink me back into my chair, then laughed lightly and called it simple paperwork. But paperwork is never simple once it contains an expired acknowledgement, a stale legal description, and my name placed there without consent. I laid the folio on the display table and spoke clearly enough for the room to hear, without turning the moment theatrical. The notary commission on page 3 expired before the signature date. The legal description comes from an outdated record, and my name appears there without consent. What Janice presented as an engagement gift had already crossed into something nobody in that room should treat casually. Reed stood first. Emma followed, and Owen came toward me with the expression he wore when patience had finally burned through. Janice kept smiling and asked whether I was really choosing tonight to make this about myself, as though legality were bad manners and silence were grace. I unfolded Diane's note beside the folio and said someone had warned me to check page 3 before this packet was opened in my name. Emma stopped being a guest at that point and asked why my name appeared anywhere on documents I had never reviewed. Reed turned to his mother and asked where Diane actually was, and the room lost its last polite place to hide. Janice answered too quickly, insisting Diane had approved everything verbally, and several people nearby looked up the way people do when confidence arrives a second too fast. The door opened before I needed another sentence, and Diane came in with her coat still on and a photocopied property record in hand. She reached the table, glanced once at the packet, and said she had never signed anything transferring the Lincoln Park brownstone to Reed. She had discussed revising her estate plan after surgery. Nothing more. And she had never authorized Janice to present that house tonight. Nobody needed louder voices after that because the expired commission, the stale legal description, and the false review line had already changed the room. Diane placed her record beside the folio, and the packet Janice had dressed as generosity now looked like exposure waiting for a lawyer. Janice was still standing where she had planned to humiliate me, but every eye had turned away from spectacle and toward risk. And that shift landed harder than any public insult Janice had planned for me. Diane set the photocopied email beside the folio, and the room leaned closer when the sender line showed Janice requesting old signature scans under the excuse of updating insurance files. That detail changed the packet from reckless family theater into something colder. Because nobody asks for archived signatures days before a surprise transfer, unless appearances matter more than control there. I watched Emma read the email, then watched her face harden in the exact instant she understood. Her engagement dinner had been selected as cover. Not celebration. Not love tonight. Before Janice could recover, Emma added another fact the room had not heard: that Janice had pitched a society photographer on capturing the property presentation for local coverage that night. That landed harder than the expired commission because it explained the staging, the folio, the applause, and the pressure to let the scene become memory before anyone studied paper closely. Janice had not only brought a false deed into public, she had tried to wrap it in witnesses, cameras, and family sentiment, so later objections would look cruel and jealous. I turned to the back of the packet and found the projected property tax payoff sheet. With the remaining balance marked for settlement from the wedding budget itself that evening, Reed stared at the page as though it had changed languages in his hands. Because his mother had never mentioned that any gift required clearing taxes and prior obligations first. Emma asked whether her name, her dinner, and her guest list had been used to sanitize a transfer. Nobody in that room had the legal right to celebrate tonight publicly. Owen stepped in then and told the table Janice had asked him more than once how my review credentials actually worked internally and had borrowed our old laptop last month. The room did not need more than that. Not after the dead notary block. The stale legal description, Diane's denial, the email request, and the payoff sheet on display there. Janice tried calling it a misunderstanding, but the packet in front of us had already become exactly what she feared most, a documented pattern instead of one messy mistake tonight. Emma ended the first layer herself when she stepped away from Janice, looked at the photographer waiting near the doorway, and said no images of this property would leave that room tonight. Reed followed immediately, telling everyone the presentation was over and that he would not touch a single page until an independent lawyer reviewed every line himself. The applause Janice had built the night around never came, and the silence that replaced it stripped the spectacle down to exactly what it was in public. Diane took the second layer with less emotion and more force, because she knew where family shame ended and legal consequences began in Illinois for everyone involved. She said Monday morning would bring an affidavit denying the signature, a petition to cancel the deed, and formal notice to every party touching title. Nobody in that room needed a lecture after that, because clouded title, false acknowledgement, and a disputed transfer already meant lawyers, not dinner speeches, from here forward. Owen handled the part Janice could not talk around, which was family, access, and all the soft permissions that had kept her powerful for years inside us. He told her she would never use our home, our devices, or my name again, and he did it in front of Reed. Reed did not defend her, did not soften it, did not ask for private grace, because the tax sheet and Diane's record had already ended that possibility forever. I picked up the folio, closed it over the dead commission, the false review line, and the payoff sheet, then slid it back toward Diane carefully. I told the room this packet should stay shut until counsel touched it, because opening it any wider would only damage people still trying to salvage the night. Janice remained at the center of the evening she had staged for my humiliation. But by then, every version of her power had started collapsing at once around her. In front of witnesses she had counted on to make silence look like consent there. The weeks after the dinner moved with the cold efficiency that follows paper once it leaves a family table and enters legal hands. Diane signed the affidavit denying the signature. Her lawyer moved to cancel the deed. And the Brownstones' title stopped being a story Janice could manage socially. Emma shut down every attempt to turn that night into a polished engagement feature. And Reed postponed every housing conversation until the record was clean. Nothing dramatic survived daylight because the expired acknowledgement, the false review line, and the payoff sheet had already done the harder work. Once those documents existed in sequence, Janice could call it misunderstanding all she wanted, but nobody around her could unknow what they had held. Owen changed next. Not loudly, but in the quiet administrative ways that matter most when someone has lived too long on unspoken access. He changed passwords, removed Janice from household logins, took back the spare key, and made sure my name would never be available for her convenience again. Reed stopped asking his mother to manage things for him, which hit her harder than any argument could have, because dependence had always been her cleanest leverage. Diane handled the rest through counsel, and every new step came from documents, signatures, and filings instead of the soft family authority Janice trusted. Janice called me 4 days later and said she never expected me to make something so private feel so public. I looked at the closed folder on my counter, thought about the dead commission on page 3, and told her she had chosen the room. That was the whole shift in power. Not that I had destroyed anything, but that the facts no longer needed her permission to stand where everyone could see them clearly. Thank you for staying with me through this story and holding space for the quiet kind of truth that still changes everything. I hope it leaves you reaching for steadier love, gentler days, and the kind of peace that does not ask you to disappear.